The fact is that an entire country lost its mind over a virus, and the people who stayed calm were treated like It was never about protecting anyone. It was a test. Will you obey even when the rules are nonsense? Now they want forgiveness without They punished the wrong people, and they did it proudly. This wasn't public health. It was public control. And if the government ever tries it again, people aren't going to be nearly as compliant. The panic machine only works when the public trusts the people running it. And after 2020, welcome to Stay in the Fray podcast. I'm your host, Ryan. This is where headlines get hit hard, hypocrisy gets shredded, and the absurd are laughed at. If you want comfort, this isn't your place. If you want blunt and unfiltered, I'm your guy. Join me in the fray.
All you gotta do is just listen up.
All right. Hey, guys. Hope everyone's doing well. I've got to talk about something that has been irking me quite a bit recently. The more that comes out about what happened back in 2020, the more it eats at me. I have to talk about it, so I will. The latest study, the one raising concerns about the effects in kids from certain vaccines, was the final straw for me. Parents are furious, commentators are blowing up about it, and suddenly all the voices who spent years shaming anyone who questioned the narrative are pretending that they're shocked. I'm not shocked. I'm done with you. The fact is that an entire country lost its mind over a virus, and the people who stayed calm were treated like criminals. Not because they were wrong, but because they didn't kneel on command. We were fed slogans, threats, guilt trips. We watched politicians throw parties while kids couldn't even sit in a classroom. We watched families get split apart because someone dared to say, hold on, does any of this make sense fully? And now we're here in 2025 listening to those same voices suddenly wring their hands about kids falling behind, about rising SNAP numbers, about childhood stress, about protecting families. These are the exact people who cheered while children were locked inside, while working parents drowned, and anyone who pushed back got labeled as a problem. Now they want sympathy for the damage they helped create. They want us to forget how quick they were to shame, punish, and divide. And now years later, the same leaders who weaponized fear are pretending they were thoughtful and measured the whole time. No, they weren't measured. They were drunk on authority, and the rest of us were forced to watch the hangover play out in real time. COVID didn't just test the country's health, it tested its sanity, and way too many people failed the moment someone with a podium told them to panic. This episode isn't a nostalgia tour. It's a reminder of who pushed the panic, who punished anyone who questioned it, and who is now pretending they never cheered while lives were torn apart. The modern left's playbook carries on. This is Stay in the Fray podcast. It is 12/8/2025. Let's roll. So why won't anyone truly talk about who suffered the most during the pandemic? It was not the elderly, though I, of course, am sad for those who were lost. It wasn't the immunocompromised. It wasn't the adults doom-scrolling cable news for moral validation. It was the kids. The one group statistically at the lowest risk became the group treated like a national hazard. And for what? To make adults feel safer? To give politicians a talking point? To let school boards act like they were solving a crisis from behind a webcam? Kids lost everything that actually builds a childhood. Friends, classrooms, sports, birthdays, routines, stability, emotional safety. 2 entire years ripped out of their lives and replaced with glitching Zoom calls and adults pretending this was necessary. And now, here again, 2025, those same politicians are suddenly crying about childhood regression and rising assistance numbers, as if they weren't the ones cheering while playgrounds were literally wrapped in caution tape. Where was all that compassion back when parents were drowning? Where was all the outrage when kids' speech and reading levels tanked? Where was all this concern when students were isolated, anxious, falling behind, and staring at screens 12 hours a day because adults preferred fear to common sense? How about taking in their own CO2 all day long with fucking masks? Let's call it what it was. Kids became collateral damage in a political drama written by people who cared more about looking heroic on television than protecting the generation that had no voice in the conversation. Now those same officials want sympathy because the consequences have finally shown up in the data. They want applause for acknowledging the problem when they created the problem and mocked anyone who said otherwise. Kids didn't fail this era. The adults in charge did, spectacularly. You know what else pisses me off? It wasn't just the fear tactics. It was bad enough. It wasn't even the rules, half of which made as much sense as wearing a seatbelt on a playground swing. The real rot showed up when choice suddenly became a dirty word. And all this came from the same crowd that chants, "My body, my choice," every fucking election cycle. Apparently your body is only your choice when it fits their moral compass. The moment it didn't, they turned into the biggest authoritarian hall monitors in America. People love to talk about bodily autonomy until the moment the liberal leaders tell them to line up and salute. Then it suddenly becomes, do what we tell you or lose your job. Do what we tell you or you're the reason this keeps dragging on. Do what we tell you or you're not welcome here. That was the moment the mask slipped. And I'm not talking about the cloth ones that everyone pretended were magical for a year. You had nurses fired in the middle of staffing shortages, teachers pushed out, police officers, firefighters, military service members, people who showed up when everything else fell apart. They were tossed aside like they were dead weight. People who spent decades serving the communities were suddenly treated like biohazards because they hesitated or asked questions or simply said, "This doesn't feel right for me." And the best part, the same politicians enforcing these mandates were caught breaking their own rules so casually it was almost artistic. Dinner parties, award shows, private events, mask-free, packed rooms, while kids were still forced to eat lunch 6 feet apart outside on concrete. It was never about protecting anyone. It was a test. Will you obey even when the rules are nonsense? Will you comply even when the people making the rules don't? Will you listen to what we tell you even though we have nothing to back it? Millions actually said no, and the punishment was swift. You didn't need to be sick to be treated like a threat. You just needed to think for yourself. That was the real disobedience. And another part that has me livid, it's these reports that are resurfacing, the ones that commentators like Megyn Kelly have been talking about recently, highlighting early findings that some doctors say should have been taken a little more seriously from the start. We're talking about those case clusters and cardiac marker studies from overseas, the ones showing inflammation signals in adolescents, the ones that sparked debate back in 2021 and then basically disappeared from public conversation. None of these were definitive. None of them proved some catastrophic collapse of children's health, but they were signals, early indicators, and parents were mocked for even asking about them. Now we're watching these same doctors come back on shows like Megyn's saying, maybe we should have paid a little more attention to those red flags. Maybe we shouldn't have silenced everybody who just wanted clarity. And here's the simple question I keep asking, the one nobody on the left wants to touch. How are we supposed to know the 5-year outcomes, the 10-year outcomes of these things, these vaccines? Nobody had taken them prior. How do we know until 5 years or 10 years pass? We weren't allowed to say that or ask that in 2021. We weren't allowed to say or ask it in 2022. We weren't allowed to say we were not allowed to say that when parents hesitated. Instead of admitting that uncertainty was real, that maybe honesty would have calmed people instead of polarizing them, the politicians in charge chose force. They weaponized shame because they didn't want to look like they didn't have answers. But the punishment for thinking differently about your own body were maddening to the core. Because the moment someone refused to fall in line, even politely, their entire life became fair game. You remember the nurses, the same people who held iPads so dying patients could say goodbye to their families, fired. escorted out like trespassers. Some lost pensions that they'd been spent decades earning. How about the firefighters, police officers who showed up when the world shut down? Heroes on Monday, threats to public safety by Friday. Entire departments gutted because someone dared to say, "I'd like a little more data, please." College students were banned from campuses, not for breaking laws, but for making a personal medical decision that didn't match the school's PR image. And parents, they got treated like criminals for asking questions at school board meetings. Not hostile, not violent, just asking. We watched airlines fire pilots, hospitals purge staff, educators pushed out mid-semester, all while politicians and celebrities broke every rule on camera and shrugged it off like it was a wardrobe malfunction. And the censorship piece wasn't just digital, it had real-world consequences. Doctors who raised concerns were dragged before medical boards, researchers blacklisted, writers had articles spiked, people lost access to payment processors. Platforms throttled posts so aggressively that entire careers evaporated. And some of these people still haven't recovered. Lost homes, savings, marriages. Lost everything simply for refusing to treat uncertainty like blasphemy. All the while, the same officials who demanded blind obedience were laughing at private dinners, unmasked, unbothered, untouchable. They punished the wrong people, and they did it proudly. This wasn't public health. It was public control. And if the government ever tries it again, people aren't going to be nearly as compliant. Here's the part would almost be funny if it wasn't so fucking infuriating. The same people who spent years screaming at their neighbors, firing workers, shaming parents, and cheering for mandates are now pretending that they were the calm, reasonable ones all along. Welcome to the revisionist phase, where the loudest bullies suddenly want to talk about nuance. You're seeing it everywhere. Politicians who push the hardest restrictions are now saying, maybe in hindsight, we should have stayed maybe we stayed closed a little too long. School officials are quietly admitting that learning loss is concerning, as if they weren't the ones chaining playgrounds like crime scenes. Journalists who mocked dissenters now writing think pieces about the importance of open debate in health. Celebrities who lectured America from their mansions on their high horses, now shrugging it all off like it was just a bad outfit. The best part, the new talking point, nobody could have known. No, plenty of people did know. Doctors, researchers, parents, teachers, citizens tried to speak out, and they got crushed for it. What the left really means is nobody we listened to or wanted to listen to knew. Now they want forgiveness without accountability. They want empathy without apology. They want to discuss the complexity of the moment while ignoring consequences they created. They want to gloss over the censorship, the mandates, the punishments, the kids who fell years behind, the businesses that died, the people who were smeared, the relationships that were destroyed. And now in 2025, they're trying to sell the idea that everyone was just doing their best. No. People were doing their best, yes. But many leaders were doing their most authoritarian, their most self-serving, their most politically convenient. And they have the balls to say that this current administration is the authoritarian one. Give me a break. And now that the dust has settled and the data is becoming public, they want to rewrite their role from enforcer to victim. That's what they always do. Victim, to sage, to someone who learned a lot. They learned nothing. They just realized the public finally feels safe enough to call out their bullshit. And they are terrified of being remembered accurately. After everything I just walked through, there's one truth that sticks out more than anything else. Crisis didn't change the left one bit. Crisis revealed the left. For years, they branded themselves as the defenders of compassion, tolerance, inclusion, the ones who listen to the science, who protect the vulnerable, who stand up for the little guy. But when the pressure hit, when the country was actually scared, when politicians realized fear was an easy tool for control, all that branding evaporated. The masks came off, figuratively anyway, and underneath was something far more authoritarian than most people expected. You saw it in real time. Their instinct was not discussion, it was suppression. Their instinct wasn't caution, it was compliance. Their instinct wasn't transparency, it was a narrative control. Their instinct wasn't empathy for differing situations, it was moral superiority wrapped in outrage. They didn't ask, what does this mean for families, for kids, for livelihoods? They asked, why aren't these people listening to us? And once they realized that fear was powerful, convenient, and politically useful, they couldn't give it up. Because when people are scared, they obey. When people are scared, they don't question authority. When people are scared, they'll surrender freedoms they'd never give up during normal times. And as for the left, that was intoxicating. It's why rules stopped making sense. It's why hypocrisy didn't bother them. It's why breaking their own policies didn't trigger shame, just annoyance that someone caught them. Because deep down, their worldview depends on one belief. They know better than you. You're about your health, about your kids, your risks, morality, your decisions. And the pandemic gave them a perfect laboratory to test how far that belief could go. Turns out, pretty far. And here's the part that they hate. People remember. And people aren't going to hand over that kind of power again. Not without a fight, not without plenty of questions, and not without a lot more resistance than the last time. When you strip away all the slogans and the virtue signaling and the moral theatrics, you're left with a simple truth. They trusted control more than they trusted people. And that's why, even now, with all the data being public and the debates reopened, they still can admit they were wrong. Because admitting they were wrong means admitting that they used fear to gain power. And once you admit that, you don't get that power back. People ask me why I'm so passionate about the left's antics, why I'm so despised, why I despise their actions so much. Why not just ignore them, they ask. I've tried. I've really tried. But here's the thing. Their playbook did not end when the masks came off. It didn't end with mandates. It didn't even end when the experts quietly admitted that half the rules never made any sense. Nope. The left keeps the same fear machine running with everything else in our country. They just swapped the labels. This is the same crowd that told you were going to kill grandma in 2020 and are now telling you Trump's going to turn America into a war zone if he makes the streets safer. Deporting illegal immigrants is somehow an act of moral evil. Tariffs will destroy the economy, even though they've done the exact opposite. Late night talk show hosts are being silenced from the same side that cheered when real censorship crushed people during COVID. It's the same tactic every time. Fear, panic, shock, obey. They don't debate, they don't persuade. They just scream that the world is ending if you don't think how they want you to. And here's the problem. Here's the problem I think they're running into now in 2025. Fewer people are buying their bullshit. People remember how they were treated. People remember how dissent was punished. People remember who weaponized fear and who tried to keep them calm. People remember the hypocrisy, the punishments, the lies, the rules for thee. The panic machine only works when the public trusts the people running it. And after 2020, and up to the minute today, I think that trust is gone, burned, dead. You see it everywhere. Democrats losing working class voters, parents flipping school boards, minorities walking away from the party that took their loyalty for granted. Even liberals are saying, shit, something feels off here. People fled their COVID narrative. Now they're fleeing their 2025 narrative because it's the same script. And the audience has finished pretending that it's compelling. Let me make this personal for a second before I wrap up. I never got the shot. I am proud as hell about that. People joked, my future kids were going to glow in the dark or some bullshit. Meanwhile, at this rate, my sperm might be a blue chip commodity by 2030. And not because I'm special, but because I stayed calm when the country pushed panic like a drug. I didn't scream at my neighbor. I didn't treat strangers like contagion. I didn't let politicians turn fear into religion. And now that the dust has settled, it turns out people who kept their heads weren't the threat at all. They were the warning. The left used COVID to test compliance. Now they're using crime, immigration, censorship, tariffs the exact same way. Same script, different crisis. But the country's changing. People are not cowering anymore. People aren't swallowing the narrative whole. People aren't mistaking fear for morality. The fear-mongering worked once. But now it's 2025. We remember we're done. And the playbook has lost its magic. We remember 2020. We remember the punishments, the smug lectures, the silencing, the hypocrisy. We remember exactly who treated us like problems instead of people. And now, after everything that's come out, after all the rewrites, after all the walkbacks, after all the no one could have known nonsense, their power has never looked smaller. Their panic tricks have never been weaker. Their moral high ground has never been emptier. Here's my question. Why won't they apologize? Why won't they admit what they did? Why are they still pretending that they were the responsible ones? I'll tell you, because admitting the truth means admitting the whole house of cards was built on fear, pressure, censorship, and emotional blackmail. It would be showing the other team their playbook, but we figured it out anyway. And I'm doing my best to make sure those plays never work again. Because once people stop being afraid, they stop being controllable. So yeah, that's it. Like and subscribe and all those things, comments. I loved listening to you guys, reading what you have to say. I hate asking for it, but it really helps. We've got to grow. We have to keep growing as a community. We are a team. You're the ones keeping the conversation alive. Spread it, share it, push it forward. So stay sharp, stay awake, stay unafraid. Stay in the fray. Love you guys.
All you had to do was just listen up.